So you better not ration it, because if you ever had a heart attack, clearly it would have been because you didn't have the angioplasty. So I don't know, from an economic perspective, it's pretty easy to see how you could, in many cases, reduce costs without having any significant impacts on health. But from a political perspective, how you get there is not clear. And even, like I said, we're moving more towards a world where there's like cost sharing with these high deductible plans and so forth. But when you start talking about procedures that potentially would cost like tens of thousands of dollars, I don't think like cost sharing is really going to be sufficient to deter you from getting those procedures, because you're talking about cases where somebody might face a deductible of like a couple $1,000s or something like that. And I don't know, maybe that would potentially be enough to have you say, oh, I really need this angioplasty because it will cost me a couple $1,000 out of pocket. But it could certainly be the case that if you're thinking, well, it's a $20,000 procedure, and I have to pay $2,000 for it, that doesn't seem totally unreasonable. In the long run, then, rising taxes could be the ultimate break on healthcare spending, in the sense that Medicare, as we said, is the largest provider, largest funder of healthcare in the U.S. And if you like having Medicare, which everybody does, regardless of their political affiliation, then taxes are going to have to rise, because we can't continue to fund Medicare at the current levels. That the current cost increases. If they continue, we will not have enough money to fund Medicare from the current Medicare taxes, which are not all that high. So eventually, something will probably have to happen, but when that happens is not entirely clear. Probably some combination of like you have to have a downturn. I mean, you have to sort of have this long run continued increase in costs, maybe combined with some sort of economic downturn that really forces the issue, because the government's budget deficit becomes so severe that they have to do something. But I'm totally unwilling to make any prediction about when that would occur, just that it will presumably occur at some point. Okay. So then the last sort of set of topics that I want to talk about here are going to be these market failures in healthcare. And so the idea here, the point here, in some ways, I guess it's a little bit backward, in the sense that we've talked about healthcare costs, and we've talked about different ways in which healthcare gets funded, and we've talked about the effectiveness of healthcare. And it should be very obvious from our discussions that the government is a major player in the healthcare market. Less so, I guess, in the United States than in other countries, but in spite of that fact, it still is tremendously important in the healthcare market in the United States. So we said, well, Medicare accounts for a ton of spending. That's a completely government-funded program. Medicaid also accounts for a non-trivial portion, also government-funded. And then even the stuff, even like employer-provided healthcare is still rooted in government policy. So the government actually funds a very large part of that as well, in the sense that it's all tax-free. So you could view that as a giant tax credit to employees and/or employers for healthcare benefits. And so there's literally money going in there, in the sense that the government is substantially reducing its tax revenues to fund this. And furthermore, they're really that money. It's not just like this isn't just sort of a transfer that has no impact on behavior. So the money itself is potentially responsible for the structure of the market, in the sense that if there weren't this giant tax benefit, it's not at all clear that companies would be offering healthcare benefits at the sort of rate that they do, or at the frequency that they do. Most jobs involve healthcare, most full-time jobs involve healthcare benefits, and without that tax subsidy, it's not so clear that would be true. So even the United States, which sort of has less government involvement than many other countries in the world, or at least many other developed countries in the world, we still have a tremendous amount of government involvement. And so from an economics perspective, typically we would think that if the government's involved, it's probably because there's some sort of market failure, right? So either there's a market power issue when you're thinking about sort of natural monopolies like utilities and things like that, or maybe there's sort of a question of externalities when you start thinking about like environmental regulations, or maybe there's a question of excludability and whether or not the good is rival when you start thinking about public goods. And those are all issues to varying degrees in the healthcare market, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But one thing that you sort of don't hear about that much in a lot of other markets, but that is hugely important in the healthcare market, is essentially the issue of adverse selection. So that's what we're going to really spend the next couple lectures talking about, or in the case of the activity, sort of experiencing. So the first paper to really make focus on this point was this paper by George Akerlof in 1970, which, if you were just going to read like a single economics paper that, technically all of the, well, not all of them, but a lot of the papers on the syllabus are economics papers. They're published in economics journals and so forth. But if you're just going to read basically a single economics paper that's purely theoretical, so as opposed to like being empirical in the sense that it has, is working with some sort of data set and reporting estimates from a regression or for some other empirical model, the Akerlof paper, I think it probably has some stylized examples involving the used car market, but it doesn't use any actual data. It's just purely a theoretical paper. And if you are going to read a single theoretical economics paper, this is definitely the one to read, in the sense that it makes a really important point, and at the same time, it's very accessible. So it's almost unique in the sense that it is a theoretical paper, but at the same time, it's very simple and very important. So that's a very, very rare combination, and I would strongly recommend that you read through it. So the point of the paper, so George is professor here in the econ department. I'm not quite sure if he's emeritus or not at this point, but he won the Nobel Prize essentially for this paper. And technically, it's for like a body of work that you do, but this was really the most important paper in his portfolio. And so what he does is he makes the point that asymmetric information, so a case where one side of the market basically has more information than the other side of the market in a transaction, that type of asymmetric information can really mess up markets in a fundamental way. So we talked about the sort of baseline case where you have perfect competition and also like perfect information. In those cases, there's no externalities and so forth, but in those cases, we typically believe that we're going to achieve a Pareto efficient allocation, and we're going to achieve that allocation by allowing trading between individuals or between firms, basically between units in the economy, right? So if I have something that if I have some good and you value it more than I do, then presumably we'll engage in a trade where you pay me more than my valuation, but less than your valuation, and then so I end up better off because I've got more than it was worth to me, and you end up better off because you paid less than it was worth to you. So that's sort of the baseline case, and then we talked a lot about externalities as a type of market failure that moves us away from Pareto efficiency. So it could be beneficial from the perspective of you and I to engage in some trade, but maybe somehow that trade makes somebody else worse off who's not involved in the trade, and so there's a third party that's experiencing an externality, and at that point you're certainly it's not going to be a Pareto improvement trade at that point, because by definition, Pareto improvement applies and nobody else is made worse off. At that point, you have to sort of figure out, okay, well, is the net benefit from that trade between the two of us, is there enough left over from that surplus that accrues to compensate that third party to make the whole? And there are some externalities, again, that we'll sort of consider in the domain of healthcare, but really, I think sort of the first order market failure that you think about when you start thinking about trying to have sort of a pure private free market where you provide healthcare is incomplete and asymmetric information. So one of the nice things about the Akerlof paper is that it uses like a very sort of simple market, or I don't know, very like not particularly exciting market that people nevertheless kind of have a lot of experience with, which is the market for used cars. And this is a market in which sellers typically have more information than buyers. So he's specifically looking at quote unquote the market for lemons. The idea here is that if you're not familiar with the term, a lemon basically refers to, in this case, a car that has a variety of mechanical problems that aren't necessarily like readily apparent if you just go and take it for a test drive. So the idea is that you, the owner, are going to know whether or not you have a lemon because you've driven it for tens of thousands of miles, and so it will have become apparent to you whether or not the car operates properly. But if I'm the buyer, and I want to buy from you, and I just take it for a 3-mile test drive, and even if I maybe take it by a mechanic or something, not going to be immediately apparent to me whether or not I'm buying a lemon. So you definitely don't want to buy a lemon because you're going to incur all sorts of maintenance costs and it'd be really inconvenient and so forth. But it may not be, that may not be something that you're able to judge. So suppose that I wish to sell my slightly used car, and that might indicate that I changed my mind. So maybe I bought a Honda Accord. So we actually have a Honda Accord, which we bought after we got like rear-ended in our previous car. And so that was like a situation where we kind of had to buy a car in like a period of a week or two because what happened is like the previous car was not like it was itself 8 or 9 years old, and so like we got rear-ended. The damage was not particularly extensive, but it was sufficient to bend the frame a little bit. And then you get into the scenario where the salvage value of the car is like $5,000 or something. So they're like, rather than spending say $6,000 to fix it, why don't we just total out the car and give you $5,000? So at that point, then you're like, okay, well, fine, I understand the logic behind that in the argument. And I was actually surprised that they were like basically giving us more than the car seemed like it would have been worth prior to the accident. But then the problem is, okay, now you have like $5,000 to get a car, so you have to go and buy a car relatively quickly. So we didn't kind of have like a lot of time to think about exactly which car we might want. And so at the time we ended up buying an Accord, and we lived in San Francisco and still live in San Francisco. And I think after a while I felt like it was just too large a car for San Francisco, just because parking tends to be so constrained. Both we lived in a place that had like a super duper tight parking space, but then also when you're like getting street parking situations, also sometimes the available spaces will be kind of small. And so we sort of had this car that was somewhat too large, and then also doesn't get great city mileage. Actually gets like pretty good highway mileage, but in the city there's just because you're just transporting or you're just moving around a lot of weight for a larger car, you just are not going to get very good mileage unless you have a hybrid. So at one point, like a couple years after we bought it, I actually thought about potentially, maybe we should have made a different decision and sort of like sell it and buy a different car. We ended up not doing that, and now we're in a case where like since we had kids, we need a larger car anyway. So sort of I guess it all sort of kind of worked out in the end. But the issue with the reason, like one of the main reasons why I didn't sell it and then rebuy or buy a different car is that essentially like I wouldn't have gotten all that much money for it. Well, I mean, I would have gotten a substantial amount of money for it, but relative to what I paid for it, I would have had to take like, I don't know, maybe a $5,000 discount or something like that, even though it wasn't that old at that point. It was only like a couple years old. And so the problem is that if you're a buyer and I'm offering this car that's only a couple years old to you, you don't necessarily know why it is that I'm trying to sell it, right? So on the one hand, maybe it's just an indication that I changed my mind and I bought one car, but instead I want to now buy a different car, which in my case it would have been. But it could also indicate that after driving it around for a couple of years, I've learned that it's a lemon and there's just some mechanical problems with it, and I don't want to spend thousands of dollars getting it fixed. I'd rather just unload it onto somebody else and have it be their problem and buy a new car. And the problem is that I cannot, so as the seller, I can't credibly signal to you that it's not a lemon, right? So let's suppose that you have some sort of prior distribution in your head about what the frequency of lemons in the overall population is. And so you could think that like, okay, so maybe 1 in 10 cars is itself a lemon, right? So if that's true, then if you were to just like walk out onto the street and you saw like a 2-year-old Honda Accord or something like that, and you said, okay, I'm just going to make this person an offer right here on the spot, even though they're not, they haven't advertised the cars being for sale. You're just going to walk up to them and be like, hey, do you want to sell this? So they could, your prior then at that point would be that there's a 1 in 10 chance that it's a lemon. And so what you'd be doing is sort of, you presumably do some math in your head and you say like, well, if it's not a lemon, I'm willing to pay $20,000, but if it is a lemon, I only want to pay like $10,000. And I think there's like a 1 in 10 chance that it's a lemon, and so what I should pay is presumably something like $19,000, I think, to sort of equate or to basically offer like the expected value of the car to you, given that you think there's like a 90% chance it's worth $20,000 and a 10% chance that it's worth like $10,000. So if you were thinking about just making an offer on a car that was kind of randomly being drawn from the population of vehicles on the road, then that's what you would do. The problem is that a car that's offered for sale is not going to represent a car that's been randomly drawn from the population of cars on the road, right? So the owner is selling the car specifically, for some reason, and one of those possible reasons is that it's a lemon, so they want to offload it. Another possible reason is that maybe they've just changed their mind. But the thing is that most people are not changing their mind, right? Most people have bought a car and plan to keep it for at least 5 or 10 years. So it's relatively uncommon that somebody wants to sell a car that's just 1 or 2 years old for what we'll think of as being like exogenous reasons. And so the issue then becomes, let's say that 10% of people who buy cars want to change their cars after 2 years, and 10% of cars are lemons. When you think about cars that are offered for sale, there's now going to be a 50-50 chance that it's a lemon, right? Because it's basically like 10% of cars are on the market because the owners changed their mind, and then the other 10% are on the market because they're lemon. And so conditional on it being on the market and offered for sale, there's going to be a 50-50 chance at that point that is actually a lemon, which is a much higher probability of being a lemon than if you were to just randomly pick a car off the road. So that's going to further reduce the amount that you're willing to pay for the car. Okay, so it's now